"She's my wife," the Mafia boss said, and everyone fell silent. Chloe just wanted to finish her shift and go home, but those words knocked the ground out from under her feet. Chloe Bennett was mopping the marble floor in the main lobby of the Monarch Casino, right in the heart of the Las Vegas Strip, when she heard a shrill voice cutting through from the reception desk. It was a scorching Thursday afternoon in September, and the casino was packed with high-rolling guests. She had worked here for 2 years, 27 years old, knowing every hidden corner of this glittering empire, every stubborn stain that wouldn't come off, every complaint from the most demanding VIPs. "Do they let just anyone in here?" A woman in an expensive designer dress and oversized Gucci sunglasses shrieked. "Is this a 5-star casino or a homeless shelter?" Chloe looked up. The woman was pointing straight at her face. Her simple blue uniform was damp with water from the mop bucket. Her cheeks burned with humiliation. "Ma'am, she works here," said Rachel, the receptionist, her voice polite but firm. The woman let out a mocking laugh. "Works here? Then why is she walking around the lobby looking like trash, as if she were a guest? People like her should use the back entrance. I'm paying a fortune to stay here. I don't want to see dirty servants." Chloe gripped the mop handle until her knuckles turned white. It wasn't the first time someone had treated her like this, but never in front of so many people. Several guests had stopped to watch the scene unfold. She wanted to disappear. She wanted the floor to swallow her whole. That's when a deep, calm voice sliced through the silence. "She's not a servant." A tall man in a flawless 3-piece black suit, dark brown hair slicked back, appeared beside Chloe. He looked about 36, his face cold and unreadable, but his gray eyes held something she couldn't quite decipher. Chloe recognized him instantly. Julian Ashford, the owner of the Monarch, the man they whispered about in dark corners. She sometimes saw him walking through the corridors, always surrounded by bodyguards, always distant. They had never exchanged more than a passing nod. The arrogant woman frowned. "Not a servant? She's wearing a uniform." Julian looked at Chloe for just 1 second, as if silently asking for permission. Then he turned to the woman, his voice cutting like ice. "She's my wife." The entire lobby froze. Chloe felt her legs trembling beneath her. "Wife." She opened her mouth to speak, but Julian continued without looking at her. "My wife likes to help the staff from time to time. It's a personal choice of hers. And frankly, ma'am, the way you treat people makes me question whether this casino is the right place for you to be spending your money." The woman's face turned crimson. She opened and closed her mouth several times like a fish gasping for air, snatched her Birkin bag, and stormed toward the elevator, her heels clicking furiously against the marble. Julian turned to Chloe. His eyes were serious, but there was something in them she couldn't read. "I'm sorry about that," he said quietly, just loud enough for the two of them to hear. "I had to stop her. Are you okay?" Chloe still couldn't process what had just happened. She nodded, speechless. "Good," he said. Then, before walking away, he lowered his voice even further. "Tomorrow, 3 o'clock. Come to my office on the 50th floor. We need to talk." He walked away, leaving Chloe standing in the middle of the lobby, her heart pounding, her mind flooded with questions. That night, she couldn't sleep. If you enjoyed this story, smash that like button and share it with someone who loves a good drama. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss what happens next. Chloe pushed open the door to the small apartment in Henderson, the hinges letting out a sharp, scraping squeal in the stillness of the night. The place had 1 bedroom, a kitchen barely bigger than a closet, and a living room that felt cramped even when it was empty. But it was all she could afford. She stepped inside, flipped on the light, and saw Tommy sprawled on the sofa, curled in on himself, sweat soaking through his shirt until the fabric clung to him. Her little brother was 22, but right now he looked like a child trapped in the grip of a nightmare. Withdrawal was always hell. Chloe had watched it happen too many times. She set her handbag down, went for a glass of water and the pill from the kitchen shelf. Then she sat beside Tommy and gently lifted his head. "Tommy, take your medicine." His eyes fluttered open, dull and unfocused. He swallowed the pill like it was nothing more than a reflex, then slipped back into a restless, uneasy sleep. Chloe pulled the blanket up over him and sat in silence, watching that pale, hollowed face. 5 years earlier, when their mother died of cancer, Tommy had collapsed completely. He'd turned to drugs as an escape, and Chloe had spent every dollar she earned trying to drag him back from that cliff. $47,000 of hospital bills from their mother still sat on her shoulders like a weight she couldn't shrug off. 2 jobs, nights without sleep, and worry that never loosened its grip. That was Chloe Bennett's life. She rose, went into the kitchen, and lowered herself into an old, worn chair. The images from the afternoon kept circling, over and over, as if her mind couldn't set them down. Julian Ashford, those cold gray eyes, that low voice, steady with power. She's my wife. She still didn't understand why he'd said it. She was only a cleaning employee, invisible in the glittering empire he owned. Chloe took out her phone and typed Julian Ashford into the search bar. Result after result filled the screen. Owner of the Monarch Casino, one of the largest casinos in Las Vegas. The Ashford family, a business empire stretching from real estate to entertainment, with whispers of ties to the underworld that no one dared to say out loud. She kept reading. The Devil of Vegas. That was the nickname people had given him. One old article from 5 years ago made her stop. Anyone who stands against Julian Ashford disappears. It told the story of a business rival who had tried to sabotage the Monarch. The man was ruined within 3 months, and after that he vanished without a trace. The police investigated and found nothing. The case closed in silence. Chloe swallowed, and a chill slid along her spine. She was tangled up with someone like that, and tomorrow she had to go to his office. Alone. She wanted to run, to pretend this afternoon had never happened, but she couldn't. If she lost her job at the Monarch, she wouldn't have enough money to pay the debt, not enough to take care of Tommy. Everything would collapse. Chloe turned off the phone and stared out the window. The nightlights of Henderson blinked weakly. Nothing like the dazzling glare of the Las Vegas Strip. She belonged to this world, the world of people who fought to survive one day at a time. Julian Ashford belonged to another, where money and power decided everything. Those two worlds weren't supposed to touch, but now they had. Chloe stood and walked back to the sofa, looking down at Tommy's pallid face. Her brother was fighting, day by day, to climb out of the dark. She couldn't give up now. Whatever Julian Ashford wanted, she had no choice but to face it. For Tommy. For survival. Exactly 3 o'clock the next afternoon, Chloe stood in front of the private elevator that led up to the 50th floor. In the entire 2 years she'd worked at the Monarch, she'd never once set foot in this part of the building. The 50th floor was forbidden territory, reserved for top executives and the most special guests. Regular employees like her weren't even allowed to stand near this elevator. A security guard in a black suit looked her up and down, suspicion plain on his face. "Do you have an appointment?" Chloe nodded, her voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Ashford, he told me to come." The guard lifted the phone, spoke a few clipped words, then handed her a black card. "Swipe this to go up. Mr. Ashford's office is at the end of the hallway." Chloe stepped into the elevator, her heart pounding hard enough to feel in her throat. The doors slid shut, and she had the sensation of being swallowed into a world that didn't belong to her. The elevator stopped, the doors opened, and Chloe walked into a wide corridor lined with thick, dark gray carpet and abstract paintings mounted on the walls. She went to the end of the hallway and stopped in front of a heavy oak door. Taking a long breath, she knocked. "Come in." Julian's voice carried from inside. Chloe pushed the door open and stepped through. The office was larger than her apartment in Henderson. A massive glass wall looked out over the entire Las Vegas Strip, afternoon light pouring in until the room seemed gilded in gold. The furnishings were dark and expensive. A desk of black oak, a deep brown leather chair, bookshelves climbing all the way to the ceiling. Julian stood by the window with his back to her. He wore a gray suit, not the black one from yesterday. And when he turned, Chloe realized something was different. Those gray eyes weren't cold and commanding the way she'd seen before. They were tired, worn down, as if he hadn't slept all night. "Sit." Julian pointed to the chair in front of the desk. Chloe sat, hands folded on her thighs, trying to keep herself from shaking. Julian lowered himself into the chair across from her, stayed silent for a moment, and then spoke. "About yesterday, I'm sorry. It was impulsive. I shouldn't have pulled you into it." Chloe didn't know what to say. She only nodded and waited. Julian let out a breath and rubbed his forehead. But now it's too late to take it back. The rumors are already spreading. Some people in high society have heard. And he stopped, jaw tightening. "And my family knows too." Chloe felt her heart draw tight. "Your family." Julian stood and walked back to the window, looking down at the city far below. "My mother, Eleanor Ashford. She's 68, and her heart is very weak. The doctors say she has only a few months left, maybe less." His voice dropped, as if each word sliced its way out of him. "This morning she called me." She cried, not from sadness, from happiness. She thinks her son has finally found someone to love. Chloe stayed quiet. She hadn't expected the story to turn this way. Julian turned to look at her. And for the first time, Chloe saw real pain in those eyes. Not anger, not coldness, just the pain of a son about to lose his mother. For years, my mother has worried about me. She's afraid that when she's gone, I'll be alone. She keeps asking when I'll get married, when I'll find someone, and I always tell her I don't need it. Julian paused, swallowing hard. But the truth is, I don't want her to leave this world still worrying. I want her to have peace in her last days. Chloe felt the weight of every word he said. She thought of her own mother, of those final days in the hospital, of the helplessness of watching someone you love slip away while you can't do a thing to stop it. Mr. Ashford, she began. Julian. He cut her off. Call me Julian. Chloe nodded. Julian, I understand your pain, but I don't understand why you're telling me these things. Julian met her eyes, his gaze both exhausted and unyielding. Because I need your help. Chloe felt the air in the room thicken, as if it had turned heavy and slow. She'd sensed the answer coming, but she still asked, her voice barely more than breath. Help you how? Julian walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and took out a file. But he didn't open it right away. Instead, he looked Chloe straight in the eyes and said, I want you to pretend to be my wife, only for a few months. It felt as if someone had driven a fist into Chloe's chest. She was certain she'd heard him wrong. What? You heard me. Julian said it calmly, as if he were proposing an ordinary business deal. Pretend to be my wife. Until my mother, he didn't finish the sentence. But Chloe understood. She shot to her feet, the chair scraping back with a sharp squeal against the floor. You want me to deceive a dying woman? Julian didn't flinch at her reaction. It's not deception. It's giving her peace. Giving her the one thing she wants before she goes. It's still a lie, Chloe said, her voice trembling with anger. I can't do that. I'm not that kind of person. Silence settled over the office. Julian studied her for a long moment, then set the file on the desk and opened it. Chloe Bennett, 27, born in Henderson, Nevada. Mother died 5 years ago from cancer. Chloe went rigid. Julian kept reading, his tone even, like he was going through a financial report. Debt of $47,000 in hospital bills. Younger brother, Tommy Bennett, 22, currently in withdrawal treatment at the Happy Valley Center, currently working 2 jobs, cleaning staff at the Monarch Casino and night shift waitress at Tony's Diner. Monthly income insufficient to cover living costs and the expense of her brother's treatment. He lifted his gaze to Chloe, gray eyes turning razor cold. I know everything about you, Miss Bennett. I don't make deals with someone I don't understand. Heat rushed into Chloe's face. Anger and shame twisted together until she could hardly breathe. She wanted to scream at him, to tear the file in half, to walk out of this room and never come back. But she couldn't, because everything he'd said was true. You've been watching me, she asked through clenched teeth. I investigated. Julian replied, that's how I work. And what I saw was a woman fighting to survive, someone carrying everything alone without complaining. He closed the file and pushed it aside. I'm not asking you to do this without something in return. If you agree, I'll pay off the $47,000. I'll move Tommy to the best rehabilitation center in Nevada, with top doctors. And throughout this marriage arrangement, you'll be fully supported financially. You won't have to worry about anything. Chloe stared at him, her thoughts spinning. $47,000. That number had pressed on her chest like a stone for 5 years. And Tommy, her brother, deserved better care, deserved a real chance to start over. But what was the price? Deceiving a dying woman, living inside a lie. She closed her eyes, and the image of her mother rose up. Her mother had gone too, still worrying for Chloe, worrying for Tommy. If someone could have given her even a little peace in her last days, even if it was only a lie, would that truly have been wrong? Chloe opened her eyes and looked straight at Julian. Pay my debt. Make sure Tommy gets the best treatment, she said, her voice firm. That's all. I don't need your money. I don't need financial support. I don't need anything else. Julian lifted an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise crossing his otherwise unreadable face. Are you sure? I can give you more than that. I'm not a gold digger, Mr. Ashford, Chloe replied. I'm agreeing for your mother, not for your money. A beat of silence. Then Julian nodded slowly, a faint smile passing over his mouth. Not a mocking smile, not one of contempt. It was the smile of someone who just found something unexpected. "You're the first person who hasn't demanded more," he said. "That's rare." Julian stood, stepped in front of Chloe, and held out his hand. "Then we have a deal." Chloe looked at that hand. The hand of a man people called the devil. The hand of a son, desperate for his mother to leave this world in peace. She took it and shook it firmly. "We have a deal." Julian nodded. "The contract starts now, Mrs. Ashford." The name sounded strange on her lips. Mrs. Ashford, Chloe Ashford. But she'd made her choice. The next 2 weeks passed like a strange dream Chloe couldn't decide whether she should wake up from or keep sinking into. Every day after her shift, she went up to the 50th floor to see Julian. They sat in his office, facing each other like two strangers trying to memorize the script of a play neither of them knew the ending of. Julian told her about the Ashford family. His father, Richard Ashford, died of a heart attack when Julian was only 25. That was when Julian had to shoulder the entire empire his father left behind. An empire that stretched from casinos to real estate, from fine dining to deals he didn't explain clearly. Julian's younger brother, Derek Ashford, 32, handled what Julian called other matters. The way he said those words told Chloe she shouldn't ask for more. And then there was Eleanor, the woman Julian spoke of in a completely different voice, softer, more fragile. She was the only person in that family Julian truly loved, the one who had stayed beside him through every rise and fall, the one counting what days she had left with a weakening heart. "My mother is the kindest person you'll ever meet," Julian said, his gaze drifting somewhere far away. "She loves her children without conditions, even when we don't deserve it." One evening, after he'd told her everything he needed to about his family, Julian asked the question back. "And you, tell me about your life." Chloe hesitated, then told him, briefly, the way she lived it, without complaint, without lingering on the pain. Her mother died 5 years ago from cancer. The massive hospital debt had weighed on her ever since, and Tommy, her brother, couldn't bear the shock, so he turned to drugs as a way out. Chloe became the only one left to carry it all, working without rest to pay the debt and pull her brother out of the mud. Julian listened without speaking, but Chloe noticed the look in his eyes change. It wasn't the gaze of a boss studying an employee, or of a powerful man looking down at someone weaker. It was the gaze of someone who understood what loss did to a person. In the days that followed, Julian took Chloe shopping for new clothes, evening gowns, high heels, delicate jewelry. He taught her how to walk, how to speak, how to hold a wine glass, how to smile at the wealthy people she despised with every bone in her body. "High society judges you in the first 3 seconds, Julian said. "You have to make them believe you belong in this world." Chloe learned faster than he expected. She hadn't realized that years of enduring the contempt of VIP guests had taught her how to watch them, how to mimic them, that well. And little by little, their conversations stopped being only rehearsal. Sometimes Julian talked about sleepless nights back when he'd first taken over the empire, about the pressure to prove he deserved his father's legacy. Sometimes Chloe talked about memories of her mother, about simple dishes her mother used to cook, about Tommy's laughter when he was still a carefree little boy. They didn't notice the wall between them thinning, day by day. One evening, while they were practicing how to introduce each other at the family dinner, Chloe's phone buzzed, a message from the rehab center. "Tommy had a rough night. He's asking for you." Chloe stared at the screen, her face draining of color. She wanted to go right then, but tonight's rehearsal mattered. Tomorrow they were meeting Eleanor. Julian saw the shift in her expression. "What is it?" Chloe hesitated, then handed him the phone. Julian read the message, fell silent for a moment, then said, "Go. We can continue tomorrow." Chloe stared at him, stunned. "But tomorrow we have to meet your mother. Your brother needs you." Julian cut in. "That matters more." Chloe looked at him, speechless. This wasn't the Julian Ashford she'd read about in articles, not the devil of Vegas people whispered about. This was a man who understood what family meant. "Thank you," she whispered, then hurried for the door. But before she could leave, Julian called after her. "Chloe." She turned back. He came closer and reached up to straighten the collar of her jacket, the fabric sitting crooked on her shoulder. His fingers brushed the skin at her neck, only for a moment, but both of them went still. Warmth spread where he'd touched her. Chloe's heart began to beat faster. Julian pulled his hand back quickly, stepped away, and acted as if nothing had happened. "Tomorrow," 9 in the morning, he said, his voice sliding back into something normal. Chloe nodded and left the office, her cheeks still hot. That night, after staying with Tommy until late, she lay in bed and thought about that moment. It was only an accidental touch. It didn't mean anything. She told herself that 100 times, but her heart wouldn't listen. The next morning, Julian picked her up in front of her apartment in Henderson. He looked at her in the pale blue dress he'd chosen, then nodded, satisfied. "Are you ready for today?" Chloe nodded, but inside, she wasn't sure what she was ready for anymore. The black Bentley glided smoothly along the tree-shaded streets of Summerlin, where million-dollar villas hid behind tall fences and iron gates that looked built to keep the world out. Chloe stared through the window, feeling as if she were crossing into a place that didn't belong to her at all. The houses here were larger than the whole apartment building where she lived. Vast lawns rolled out like private parks, with shimmering pools and white stone statues posed in perfect stillness. This was Julian Ashford's world, and she was an outsider pretending she had any right to stand inside it. The car stopped in front of a Mediterranean-style villa. Red tile roof, creamy white walls glowing in the afternoon. Julian got out first, then came around to open her door. As Chloe rose, he took her hand as naturally as if they'd done it 1,000 times. His grip was warm and steady, and without thinking she tightened her fingers around his. "Remember what we practiced," Julian murmured as they walked toward the front door. "But more important, be yourself. My mother will love you." Chloe nodded, her throat dry. The heavy wooden doors opened, and a butler in a crisp black suit bowed in greeting. They stepped into a grand entry hall with soaring ceilings and a crystal chandelier throwing bright shards of light. But Chloe didn't have time to take it in, because at that very moment a voice, frail but overflowing with joy, rang out. "Julian, my son." Chloe turned and saw her. Eleanor Ashford sat in a wheelchair, pushed out from the living room by a nurse. She was thin and fragile, hair white as snow, skin creased with time and illness. Yet her eyes, autumn sky blue, still shone with a strange, stubborn life. And when she smiled, Chloe saw it at once. That smile belonged to Julian. Or rather, it was the smile Julian had inherited from his mother. Julian released Chloe's hand, hurried to his mother, and dropped to one knee to wrap his arms around her. Chloe saw his shoulders tremble, just for a heartbeat. This wasn't the devil of Vegas. This was a son afraid of losing his mother. "Mom, I want to introduce you to someone." Julian stood, turned back toward Chloe, and held out his hand. She stepped forward and placed her hand in his. "This is Chloe, my wife." Eleanor looked at Chloe, those blue eyes reading every line of her face. Then she smiled, bright as morning sunlight. "Finally," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Finally, my son has opened his heart." She lifted her arms toward Chloe, and Chloe bent to embrace her. Eleanor's arms were weak, but warm, and a faint lavender scent clung to her blouse. In that instant, Chloe felt her chest tighten. Eleanor reminded her of her mother, of those last days in the hospital, when her mother had been just as frail, just as determined to smile through pain, just as desperate to hold Chloe's hand with whatever strength she had left. Tears rose in Chloe's eyes, and she didn't have to pretend. "I'm so happy to meet you," she whispered, her voice thick. Eleanor took her hand and tugged her down into the chair beside the wheelchair. "Let me see you more clearly," she said, lifting a hand to stroke Chloe's cheek. "So beautiful. Julian, you've got a good eye." Julian stood nearby, his expression softening in a way Chloe had never seen. "If you're happy, then I'm happy." Eleanor let out a small laugh, then turned back to Chloe. "You know, Julian has been serious since he was little. He didn't smile much, didn't talk much, always trying to please his father. Richard, my husband, was a hard man. He loved his son, but he didn't know how to show it, and Julian grew up under that expectation, always trying to prove he was worthy." She paused, her gaze drifting. "When Richard died, Julian closed his heart. He poured everything into work, building an empire bigger than what his father left him. But I know he's lonely. I've been afraid he'd never let anyone into his life again." Eleanor squeezed Chloe's hand tighter, those blue eyes shining. "I was afraid he'd be alone forever. But now you're here," Chloe felt a sharp ache in her chest. Eleanor truly loved Julian, truly worried for him, and Chloe was deceiving her, acting out a play in front of a mother nearing the end of her life. "Julian, go get some water for me and Chloe," Eleanor said. Julian looked at his mother, then at Chloe, hesitated, but finally nodded and left the room. When it was only the two of them, Eleanor turned to Chloe, and something in her gaze shifted, subtly, still warm, but sharper, as if she were looking straight through every layer Chloe had tried to wear. "You have honest eyes, my girl," she said slowly. Chloe smiled, but her heart began to race. Eleanor paused, then went on. "But they're also the eyes of someone hiding something." It felt as if the blood in Chloe's veins had turned to ice. She wanted to speak, to explain, to deny it, but her mouth seemed locked. Eleanor only smiled, the smile of a mother who'd lived too much to be easily fooled. "Don't worry, my girl," she said gently, patting Chloe's hand. "Whatever it is, I'm only glad Julian has someone beside him. That's all I need." Julian returned with 2 glasses of water, and the atmosphere slid back into something normal, as if the conversation had never happened. Eleanor kept telling stories about Julian as a child, about the time he was 10 and tried to make his mother breakfast and nearly set the kitchen on fire. The 3 of them laughed, and somewhere along the way, Chloe forgot that all of it was only a performance. On the drive back, Chloe sat silent in the car, her mind spinning. Eleanor's words echoed in her ears. The eyes of someone hiding something. Her heart hammered out of rhythm. Did she know, or was it only a mother's instinct, desperate to believe? 1 week after that first meeting, Chloe returned to the villa in Summerlin with Julian for dinner with Eleanor. This time, when they stepped into the living room, there was another man standing by the window. He was nearly as tall as Julian, with ink-black hair and eyes as sharp and cold as a razor. Handsome in a dangerous way, like a wolf wearing a gentleman's skin. When he turned and looked at Chloe, it felt as if a sheet of ice swept through her. This wasn't a curious look, or a welcoming one. This was the look of a predator measuring prey. "Derek," Julian said, his voice tight. "I didn't know you were coming today, too." Derek Ashford walked over, a smile on his mouth that never reached his eyes. "Mother invited me. She wants the whole family to meet the new sister-in-law." The way he said sister-in-law made Chloe shiver, like an insult disguised as courtesy. "Chloe, this is Derek, my younger brother," Julian said, placing a protective hand at the small of her back. "Derek, this is Chloe." Derek held out his hand. Chloe hesitated for a second, then put her hand in his. Derek's hand was cold and hard as stone, and he squeezed a little harder than necessary before letting go. "Pleasure to meet you," he said, but those eyes said something else entirely. Eleanor called Julian into the inner room to talk about something with her medicine, leaving Chloe alone in the living room with Derek. Chloe started to follow Julian, but Derek stepped in, blocking her path. "Sister-in-law, want to take a walk in the garden? I'd like to speak privately." It wasn't an invitation. It was an order. Chloe glanced toward the doorway where Julian had disappeared, then looked back at Derek. She didn't have a choice. They walked out into the garden behind the villa. The landscape lights cast a soft glow, but they couldn't chase away the chill between them. Derek led her to a hidden corner behind tall hedges, where no one inside could see them. Then he turned, and the polite mask fell away completely. "I know who you are," Derek said, his voice ice cold. "The girl who mops the floors on the casino's ground level." Chloe felt her blood go still, but she didn't allow fear to show. She lifted her chin and met his gaze. "Yes, I work at the casino. Is that a problem?" Derek gave a short, contemptuous laugh. "My brother never acts on impulse. He calculates everything down to the smallest detail. And yet, suddenly, he marries a cleaning girl nobody's ever heard of." He stepped closer, crowding Chloe until she had to retreat, her back pressing into the trunk of a tree. "What game are you playing with my brother?" Chloe swallowed. "Sometimes things happen faster than people expect." "Don't insult me," Derek snarled. "You think I don't know you're hiding something. You think I believe that ridiculous love at first sight story." He lifted his hand, seized Chloe's wrist, and squeezed hard. Pain shot through her, but she clenched her teeth and didn't cry out. "Do you know what happens to people who dare to deceive this family?" Derek asked, his voice a whisper, a hiss like a snake. "We don't call the police, Miss Bennett. We handle things differently." His grip tightened, until Chloe felt as if the bones in her wrist were about to crack. "I've buried people for less." Tears welled from the pain. But Chloe didn't look away. She wouldn't let him see fear. She wouldn't beg. "Derek." Julian's voice sliced through the darkness like a blade. Chloe and Derek both turned. Julian stood a few yards away, his face carved from stone, gray eyes burning with a cold, controlled fury. Chloe had never seen him this frightening. Let her go. Now. Derek held his brother's gaze for a moment, as if weighing whether he should challenge him. Then he released Chloe's wrist and stepped back. I'm just getting to know my new sister-in-law. Julian moved forward and positioned himself between Chloe and Derek, shielding her with his body. Don't touch her again. That's an order. An order, Derek sneered. You're ordering me around because of a floor-mopping girl. She's my wife, Julian said, his voice like steel, and you'll treat her as such. The two brothers stared at each other, the silence stretched tight as a wire. Finally, Derek broke it. I'll be watching her, Julian, and I'll be watching you too. Then he walked away, his figure melting into the garden shadows. When they were alone, Julian turned to Chloe. His gaze dropped to her wrist, where red marks were already blooming against her pale skin. His jaw clenched, a muscle jumping in his cheek. He lifted her wrist gently, his thumb brushing the bruise with the lightest touch. He'll never touch you again, Julian said, his voice low and certain. I promise. Chloe looked into those gray eyes, and for the first time, she believed him. After what happened in the garden, Julian led Chloe back into the house, as if nothing had occurred. Dinner began in the grand dining room, with a long oak table that could seat 20 people. Besides Eleanor, Julian, Chloe, and Derek, there were a few other relatives, one of Julian's aunts and her husband, and a cousin whose name Chloe couldn't seem to hold on to. They all looked at her with undisguised curiosity, as if she were some strange creature that had just been discovered. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, radiant despite her frailty. She was the only person in the room who made Chloe feel genuinely welcome. Julian sat to Chloe's right, his hand occasionally brushing hers beneath the table, a quiet reassurance. Derek sat across from her, those sharp, cold eyes never leaving Chloe for a single second. I want to hear your story, Eleanor said as the appetizer was served. How did you two meet? Chloe glanced at Julian. They'd prepared for this. Julian placed his hand over hers on the table, his slight smile looking effortless. We met in the casino lobby, Mom. Chloe was helping a guest who was having trouble, and I happened to see it. I was impressed by the way she handled the situation. Then he found an excuse to talk to me. Chloe continued, her voice steadier now, thanks to all the rehearsals. We started talking, then we went for coffee, and then one thing led to another. We kept it quiet because I didn't want it to affect Chloe's job, Julian said. I wanted to make sure it was real before we made it public. Eleanor nodded, blue eyes glittering. Love comes when you least expect it. I'm so happy for you both. Derek set his wine glass down, the clink of crystal against wood sounding like a warning bell. Such a romantic story, he said, his tone gentle but edged. Sister-in-law, can you tell me what Julian's favorite food is? Chloe felt as if she'd been shoved onto a stage with no script. They'd talked about the Ashford family, about history, about Eleanor, but no one had thought to ask what Julian liked to eat. Chloe opened her mouth, but no words came. Silence stretched. 1 second, then 2. Derek's mouth curled, but before he could say anything else, Julian spoke, calm as if the question meant nothing at all. She knows things more important than food, Derek. His hand found Chloe's beneath the table and squeezed lightly. She knows when I need silence, and when I need someone to listen. That's not something everyone can do. Eleanor smiled and nodded in agreement. Derek said nothing, but his gaze didn't soften. Dinner continued, drifting into stories about business and family news, but Derek didn't let up. A few minutes later, when the main course was served, he asked again, Where did you grow up, sister-in-law? Chloe knew she couldn't lie about this. Derek had investigated her. He already knew the answer. If she lied, he'd expose her immediately. Henderson, she said evenly. I grew up in Henderson. Derek lifted his brows, feigning surprise. Henderson. That's pretty far from the Las Vegas Strip, isn't it? Not everyone is born with a silver spoon in their mouth, Derek, Julian said, his voice turning a shade colder. That doesn't lessen a person's worth. Of course not, Derek replied, the smile still not reaching his eyes. I'm only curious. After all, she's about to become part of the Ashford family. Eleanor watched the exchange with knowing eyes. She didn't speak, but Chloe felt she saw everything. Derek's veiled threats, Julian's protection, and the tension Chloe was trying so hard to hide. The air felt thick, like the moment before a storm breaks, even though the surface still wore the warmth of a family dinner. Chloe ate without tasting anything, answered polite questions from Julian's aunt without truly hearing her own words. All she wanted was to leave. When dinner finally ended and Julian walked Chloe to the door, Eleanor took her son's hand and held him back for a moment. Chloe stood a few steps away, but she could still hear Eleanor's voice, weak but clear. "You're playing a dangerous game, aren't you, my son?" Julian didn't answer. He only stood there, his back rigid. Eleanor sighed, her thin hand lifting to pat her son's cheek. "Whatever it is, don't lose yourself in it." She released him, and Julian bent to kiss his mother's forehead, then walked away. In the car, Chloe finally let out a breath. She hadn't realized she'd been holding it all evening. "Your mother knows something," she said, her voice barely there. Julian stared straight ahead at the road, his face carved from stone. "She always knows," he replied. "That's what scares me." A few days after that tense dinner, Derek Ashford walked into Julian's office on the 50th floor without warning. He shoved the door so hard it slammed against the wall, but Julian didn't even look up from the stack of papers on his desk. "I'm busy," Julian said evenly. "Get out." Derek didn't back down. He strode to the desk and threw a thick folder down right in front of Julian. "You need to see this." Julian glanced at the folder, then at his brother, his expression unchanged. "What is it?" "Proof," Derek said, voice smug. "Proof about your perfect wife." He opened the folder and flipped through the pages one by one, speaking like he was reading an indictment in court. Chloe Bennett, living in a shabby apartment in Henderson, the slums of Las Vegas. He shoved a photo toward Julian, an old building with peeling paint and rusted stairs, $47,000 in hospital debt from 5 years ago, hasn't paid a single cent. Another page followed, a debt record with every number laid out in detail. A brother named Tommy Bennett, 22. A history of drug addiction, currently in withdrawal treatment at the Happy Valley Center. Another photo, this one of Tommy, thin and sallow. And this, Derek emphasized it, placing the last picture down. Chloe in a blue cleaning uniform, mopping the casino lobby floor, beads of sweat on her forehead. "She's the one who mops floors, Julian." "A cleaning girl, and you told the whole world she's your wife." Derek folded his arms and looked at his brother with open triumph. "She's a con artist. She's using you." Julian looked at the photos and documents spread across the desk. Then he did something that caught Derek completely off guard. He laughed, not a happy laugh, but the cold laugh of someone hearing a stale joke. "You think I didn't know?" Julian asked, calm as if he were talking about the weather. Derek froze. "What?" Julian stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the busy Las Vegas Strip below. "I knew all of it before I made the offer. I knew where she lived, how much she owed, what her brother was addicted to. I don't make deals with people I don't understand, Derek. You should have known that." Derek opened his mouth, then shut it again, as if he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. You knew, and you still let her get close to Mother." Julian turned back, gray eyes cold as ice. "She's not a gold digger. She's a floor-mopping girl who suddenly becomes the wife of the richest man in Las Vegas," Derek shouted. "What do you call that if it isn't gold digging?" "She refused my money," Julian said, his voice like steel. "When I offered the deal, she only asked me to pay the debt and make sure her brother got the best treatment. Not a cent for herself. No house, no car, no jewelry, nothing." He stepped closer until he stood face to face with Derek. "That's not greed. That's survival. That's a sister doing everything she can to save her brother." Derek ground his teeth. "So what are you doing? Playing charity with her? Taking some poor girl as your wife so you can feel noble?" "I'm giving Mother what she wants," Julian replied. "She wants to see me with someone before she goes, and Chloe's helping me do that, by lying to her, by giving her peace." Silence fell over the room. The two brothers stared at each other like wolves fighting over territory. Finally, Julian spoke, his voice cold and final. "Stay away from her. That's an order." Derek let out a sharp, contemptuous laugh. "An order? You're ordering me around because of a floor-mopping girl." "I'm ordering you because she's my wife," Julian answered. "And you'll treat her like it." Derek held his brother's gaze for a long moment, eyes sharp as a blade. Then he asked, slow and loaded with meaning, "Are you protecting her, or do you have feelings for her?" Julian didn't answer. He just stood there, his face like a mask, his gray eyes giving nothing away. But that silence said everything. Derek stared at the silence in his brother, and the silence was an answer, and he didn't like that answer at all. The weeks that followed slipped by, and the strange thing was, Chloe began to forget that all of it was only a performance, Julian took her to lavish parties, expensive restaurants, charity events where Las Vegas high society gathered. She wore the dazzling gowns he chose, the jewelry he bought, and she smiled at strangers as if she belonged to this world. But what unsettled her wasn't the parties or the reporters' camera flashes. It was the moments between the two of them when no one was watching. The conversations in the car on the way home. The midnight messages when neither of them could sleep. The times Julian asked about Tommy and truly listened to the answer. Their talks were no longer a rehearsed script. They were becoming real. One night, after a charity event at the casino, Julian didn't drive Chloe home right away. Instead, he steered into a private parking area and led her into an elevator. "I want to show you a place," he said. The elevator stopped at the very top, and Julian pushed open a door that led out to the rooftop. Chloe stepped out and caught her breath. All of Las Vegas spread before her like a carpet of light. Skyscrapers glittered, neon signs flickered in endless colors, and traffic moved like rivers of brightness, beautiful enough to hurt. "This is where I come when I need to think," Julian said, standing beside her, looking out over the city. "When everything gets to be too much." Chloe looked at him. Under the dim rooftop lights, Julian seemed different. Not the powerful kingpin, not the devil of Vegas, just a man worn down by burdens nobody ever saw. "Everyone sees the power," Julian said, his voice low and far away. "Nobody sees the prison." Chloe stayed quiet, waiting. "I can't trust anyone," he went on. "Everyone wants something from me. Money, power, connections. Nobody comes close without a purpose." He turned to her, gray eyes deep as the ocean at night. "My mother is dying, and I can't save her." Julian's voice trembled, only slightly, but Chloe heard it. This was the first time she'd seen he wasn't the steel wall people believed him to be. "I've built an entire empire," he said, bitterness threading through the words. "I can buy anything in this world, but I can't buy more time for my mother. I can't buy her health back. I can't." He stopped, jaw clenched tight, as if he were holding something inside that wanted to shatter. "I'm afraid of being alone, Chloe," Julian said, a whisper like a confession. "More than anything in my life. I'm afraid that when my mother is gone, I won't have anyone left." Chloe felt her heart tighten, not with pity, but with recognition. She knew what loneliness felt like. She knew the fear of losing someone you loved. She knew what it meant to carry everything by yourself. Without thinking, she reached out and took Julian's hand. Not acting, not a script, just the instinct of one human being wanting to comfort another who was hurting. "Right now, you're not alone," she said softly. Julian looked down at her hand holding his, then lifted his gaze to her face. City lights reflected in his gray eyes, making them shimmer like stars. "You're the first person who looks at me without fear or greed," he said, his voice rough. Chloe gave a small smile. "I am afraid, but I also see you're not the devil people say you are." Julian stepped closer. The space between them narrowed until Chloe could feel the warmth of his body, the faint trace of his cologne in the air. Her heart went wild. He lifted a hand, his fingertips brushing her cheek. Chloe stopped breathing. Julian's eyes dropped to her lips, then returned to her eyes, as if he were asking a question without words. She wanted to lean in. She wanted to close her eyes and let it happen, but the last remaining piece of reason inside her pulled her back. She stepped away, letting go of his hand. "We shouldn't," she whispered, her voice shaking. Julian didn't follow. He only stood there, looking at her with eyes she couldn't read. "We shouldn't," she said again, as if she were trying to convince herself. But her eyes said something else entirely, and Julian saw it. One morning, while Chloe was changing into her uniform in the staff room, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something in her gut made her lift the phone to her ear. Chloe Bennett. A man's voice, rough and soaked in threat. "Who is this? Doesn't matter who I am. What matters is, I've got your brother." Chloe's heart seemed to stop. "Tommy. Tommy's at the rehab center. The kid slipped out last night." The man gave a short, ugly laugh. "He came to us to buy, but he didn't have the money. He owes us $15,000. Chloe felt her knees weaken. $15,000. She didn't have that kind of money. She didn't even have $1,000 in her account. "You've got 48 hours to bring it." The man's voice turned colder. "If you don't, we'll send your brother back to you, piece by piece." The call ended. Chloe stood there with the phone still pressed to her ear, her body shaking in a way she couldn't control. Tommy, her brother. The boy she'd spent her whole life trying to protect. The boy she'd worked herself raw to get into treatment. And now he was in the hands of a gang, with a 48-hour deadline and a number she could never reach. She didn't know how she got to the casino's storage warehouse. Her feet moved on their own, finding the darkest, emptiest place she knew. She sat down between stacked crates, pulled her knees to her chest, and cried. Her sobs echoed through the hollow space. She didn't know what to do. She had no money. She had no one to ask. She had only herself, like always, Chloe. Julian's voice came from the doorway. She flinched, wiped at her tears fast, and turned her face away. I'm fine, you should go. But Julian didn't go. His footsteps sounded on the concrete, closer, closer, until he lowered himself beside her among the dusty crates, in an expensive suit that would surely get dirty. Tell me, he said, gentle, but leaving no room for refusal. Chloe wanted to lie, to pretend everything was fine. But she didn't have the strength anymore. She told him everything. The call, Tommy, the gang, $15,000, 48 hours. She spoke through choking sobs, through tears, through the desperation of someone who'd finally run out of air. Julian listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stayed quiet for a moment. Then he took out his phone and dialed a number. Marcus, he said into the phone, and his voice changed completely. Cold, sharp, weighted with authority. This was the Julian Ashford people called the Devil. There's a small crew holding a kid named Tommy Bennett. Find them. Get the kid back to Happy Valley Rehab safe, and make sure they understand the kid and his sister are under my protection. He paused, listening to the voice on the other end. I don't care how much they say he owes. Clear it. And if they ever come near the Bennett family again... His voice dropped, so cold Chloe felt it down her spine. I don't need to explain what to do I? He ended the call. The whole thing took less than 2 minutes. Chloe stared at him, not believing what she'd just witnessed. It's done, Julian said, turning back to her. Tommy will be back at Happy Valley tonight. That crew won't bother you again. How? Chloe asked, her throat raw. There are things I can do that you don't want to know, Julian replied. Chloe looked at him, the man who'd solved what she thought was impossible in 2 minutes, the man with enough power to make a gang bow its head, the man all of Las Vegas called the Devil. And that man was sitting on the dirty concrete floor of a storage warehouse, just to be beside her. Without thinking, Chloe lunged forward and wrapped her arms around Julian. She looped them around his neck, pressed her face into his shoulder, and cried, not from pain anymore, but from relief, from gratitude, from something she didn't dare name. Why? She whispered into his shoulder. Why are you helping me? Julian was quiet for a moment. Then he lifted his hand and held her, gently, as if she were something fragile and precious. Because you shouldn't have to carry it alone, he said. In that moment, Chloe saw who Julian Ashford truly was. Not a devil, just a man who'd chosen to use his darkness to protect her. A few days after Tommy was delivered safely back to the rehab center, Julian took Chloe to the Monarch Casino's annual charity event. It was the most important night of the year. The night when tycoons and celebrities from all over Las Vegas gathered to donate to charitable organizations, or at least to show off their wealth. Chloe wore the wine-red evening gown Julian had chosen for her, her hair swept up, diamond earrings glittering beside her ears. She'd grown more used to the role, used to standing beside Julian, used to the curious and jealous looks from other women, used to smiling and shaking hands with strangers. But tonight, something was different. Since that moment in the warehouse, since Julian saved Tommy, since that embrace that wasn't acting, everything between them had changed. Each time Julian placed his hand on her back, Chloe felt her skin flare hot. Each time he leaned down to murmur near her ear, her heart kicked into chaos. And each time their eyes met, something in the air felt like it was waiting to ignite. The event ended around 11 at night, and when they stepped outside, Chloe was shocked to see the rain coming down in sheets. Lightning kept flashing across a pitch-black sky, and the wind howled as if it meant to tear everything apart. Julian's driver rushed up, worry written across his face. Sir, the road back to Henderson is heavily flooded. We can't make it through. Julian looked at Chloe, then nodded to the driver. All right, Miss Bennett will stay in the penthouse tonight. Chloe wanted to protest, but with the storm raging outside, she knew she didn't have a choice. They took the elevator up to the penthouse at the very top of the casino. It was the first time Chloe had stepped into Julian's truly private space. The apartment was immense, furnished in dark, luxurious tones that somehow didn't feel cold. What surprised her was a corner of the living room, where a bookshelf rose all the way to the ceiling, packed with old books whose worn spines spoke of hands that had returned to them again and again. And on the display shelves, among expensive objects, were family photographs. Julian as a boy, standing beside his mother, a rare smile on his young face. Julian at graduation, Eleanor beside him with eyes full of pride. Ordinary moments Chloe hadn't expected a man like Julian to keep so carefully. "Wine?" Julian asked as he took off his suit jacket and loosened his tie. Chloe nodded. They sat on the sofa in front of a glass wall overlooking the city, each holding a glass of red wine. Outside, the storm still growled, thunder rolling, lightning lighting the sky in bursts. Inside, there was only dim light and the quiet between them. They talked about everything and nothing at all. About the books Julian liked to read. About the movies Chloe watched over and over as a child. About dreams they'd both abandoned. A second glass was poured, then a third. Time slipped past without either of them noticing. A loud crack of thunder hit. Lightning flared across the glass, and Chloe startled. Julian set his wine down and looked at her with the gaze she'd seen on the rooftop that night. Only this time it was stronger, no longer held back. "I stopped pretending weeks ago, Chloe," he said, his voice low and rough. "Every time I held your hand, it was real. Every time I looked at you, it was real. I'm not acting anymore." Chloe felt like her heart was trying to break out of her ribs. "I know," she whispered. "Me too. And that scares me." Julian set her glass down, then lifted his hand and brushed her cheek with the lightest touch. "Then let's be afraid together," he said. He moved closer until Chloe could feel his breath on her lips. "Is that all right?" Chloe didn't answer with words. She closed her eyes, and Julian kissed her. Not a kiss on the cheek in front of a crowd. Not a performance for anyone. This was a real kiss. The kiss they'd been holding back for so long. A kiss made of feelings neither of them could deny anymore. His mouth was warm and soft, tasting of wine and something Chloe couldn't name. She lifted her hands, fingers sliding into his hair, pulling him closer. Outside, the rain screamed. The thunder and lightning kept tearing through the night. But inside this penthouse, there was only them. Only this moment. They kissed until both of them were breathing hard, until Julian finally stopped and rested his forehead against hers, eyes shut tight. "This changes everything," Chloe whispered, her voice shaking. Julian opened his eyes and looked at her with an expression she'd never seen on him before. Gentle, honest, and hungry all at once. "I know," he said, "but I don't regret it." A few days after that stormy night, Derek Ashford still didn't give up. He knew something was wrong with Julian's marriage, and he was determined to find the truth. That night, around 10 o'clock, Derek came to the casino to look for his brother. The office on the 50th floor was still lit, a sign Julian was working late. Derek stepped out of the elevator and walked down the quiet hallway. But as he neared the office, he realized the door was cracked open, just a sliver, and voices were coming from inside. Derek meant to push the door and walk in, but he stopped when he heard Chloe's voice. "How much longer do we have to keep this up?" Julian's voice came next, tired and heavy with thought. Derek pressed himself to the wall and listened. "My mother seems happy," Chloe answered. "That's what matters. This contract was supposed to be simple," Julian said. "But now everything is complicated," Chloe finished for him. "Contract." Derek felt as if someone had slapped him hard across the face. "Keep this up. The contract was supposed to be simple." Every loose piece that had been floating for weeks suddenly snapped into place. This was a fake marriage. The entire marriage was a performance. His brother had hired a cleaning girl to play his wife. And his mother, a woman already dying, was smiling because of a lie. Derek ground his teeth, his hands curling into fists. He wanted to kick the door down, to scream at Julian, to expose everything right then. But he held himself back and kept listening. "I don't want this to be fake anymore." Julian's voice was rough now, thick with feeling. Derek heard Chloe let out a long breath. "I don't either. But what about your mother? What about the lie?" Silence, for a moment. Then Julian said, "I don't know. I only know I don't want to lose you. Not now. Not when I've just found you." Derek backed away, fury boiling in his chest. So, it wasn't only a contract. His brother had truly fallen for her. Fallen for the girl he'd hired to act. Built an entire castle of lies on the foundation of a dirty agreement. And Eleanor Ashford, the kindest woman Derek had ever known, was living her last days inside a borrowed happiness. She believed her son had found love, when the truth was only a contract. Derek retreated from the hallway, his heart pounding with rage. He had to tell his mother. She deserved the truth. No matter how much it hurt, it was better than a lie. He would go to the villa right now and tell her everything. Just as Derek stepped into the elevator, his phone buzzed. The number of the butler at the Summerlin estate. Mr. Derek, Mrs. Eleanor. The butler's voice shook. She fell in the bathroom. We're calling an ambulance. She isn't waking up. Derek felt the blood in his body turn to ice. Which hospital are you taking her to? Sunrise Hospital. Please come right away. Derek ended the call, his hand trembling. His mother was in critical condition. He jabbed the elevator button, his mind spinning. The truth about the fake marriage, the contract, the lie, all of it was still there. But this wasn't the moment. Derek clenched his phone so hard his knuckles whitened, his jaw set like stone. The truth would have to wait. But not for long. Sunrise Hospital at midnight was silent in a way that felt almost terrifying. Cold, white fluorescent lights washed over an endless corridor, and the sharp stink of antiseptic hung in the air. Julian and Chloe arrived only 15 minutes after the call, both of them breathing hard with worry. Derek was already there, leaning against the wall with a face like stone. Eleanor was being rushed in emergency care. No one said a word to anyone. Julian sank onto a chair, hands laced together, head bowed low. Chloe sat beside him, wanting to take his hand but not daring to. Not with Derek there. She could feel Derek's stare burning into her from across the waiting area. He knew something. She was sure of it. 1 hour passed. Then 2. No news came from the emergency room. Julian stood and began pacing like an animal trapped in a cage. Derek didn't move, but his eyes never left Chloe. Finally, when Julian stepped out into the hallway to call the family's private doctor, Derek acted. He strode over, grabbed Chloe's arm, and dragged her into the empty corridor behind the waiting room. "Let go of me." Chloe yanked at his grip. Derek didn't release her. He shoved her back against the wall, his eyes lit with fury. "I know everything." Chloe felt the blood in her body turn to ice. The fake marriage, the contract, all of it. Derek spoke slowly, each word like a blade. "I heard your conversation with my brother last night, in his office." Chloe wanted to lie, to deny it, but she knew it didn't matter anymore. She just stood there, pale, unable to force out a single word. Derek let out a short, bitter laugh that held no joy. "So it's true. You're a fraud, and my brother is your accomplice. It isn't like you think Chloe started. I don't care what you think it is." Derek cut in. "I only care that my mother is lying in the emergency room, and the last months of her life have been built on a lie." He leaned closer, his voice ice cold. "When my mother wakes up, I'm going to tell her the truth." Chloe felt like someone had punched her straight through the chest. "Please. She's weak. The truth could kill her. Lies kill too." Derek answered, cold as steel. "Are you threatening my wife, Derek?" Julian's voice came from behind them. Chloe and Derek both turned. Julian stood at the end of the corridor, his face carved from stone, gray eyes burning with a fury Chloe had never seen before. He came toward them, each step heavy in the quiet hallway. "What are you doing, Derek? You're asking me." Derek turned fully to face his brother. "You should be asking yourself what you're doing. You're deceiving our mother. She's dying, and you're feeding her a pile of lies." "I'm giving her peace," Julian replied, his voice like steel. "The only thing she wants is to see I'm not alone before she goes. By staging a fake marriage with a floor-mopping girl." Derek snarled. Julian stepped forward until they were only inches apart, the air between them ready to ignite. "Say that about her one more time," Julian said, low and dangerous. "Go on, try it, and see what happens." The two brothers stared at each other like wolves about to tear into flesh. Chloe stood between them, not knowing what to do, her heart slamming with fear. Then the waiting room door opened, and a doctor in a white coat stepped out. Mrs. Ashford's family. All 3 of them turned. "She's awake," the doctor said. "Her condition is stable, but she's still very weak. We need to monitor her closely." Julian let out a shaky breath. "Can I see my mother?" "She has one request," the doctor said, looking at Chloe. "She wants to see you. Only you." Chloe froze. Derek stepped forward. "No, I won't allow." Julian cut him off, stepping between Derek and Chloe. "You don't get to allow anything. It's Mother's request." Derek's jaw tightened, but he didn't say another word. Julian turned to Chloe, gray eyes full of worry, but also full of trust. Go. She's waiting for you. Chloe nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat, and followed the doctor to the room. The door closed behind her. The room was quiet, filled only with the steady beep of the heart monitor. Eleanor lay in the hospital bed, thin and pale as paper, but when she opened her eyes and looked at Chloe, those blue eyes were still bright, still sharp as ever. Close the door, my girl, she said, weak but clear. It's time we speak honestly, you and I. Chloe walked to the bedside, her feet feeling as if they'd been weighted with lead. She lowered herself into the chair next to the bed and looked at Eleanor lying there, frail and fragile, like a leaf about to let go of its branch. Yet Eleanor's blue eyes were open, fixed on Chloe with a look Chloe couldn't translate. Chloe's heart hammered in her chest. This was the moment to tell the truth. Whatever happened next, Eleanor deserved to know. Chloe couldn't keep deceiving a dying woman, a woman who'd treated her with the most genuine love she'd ever been given. Mrs. Ashford, Chloe began, her voice shaking. I need to tell you the truth, about me and Julian, about our marriage. It isn't. Eleanor lifted a hand, thin and veined, blue lines raised beneath translucent skin, and stopped her. I know, my girl, she said, weak but clear. I've always known. Chloe felt like lightning had struck her. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. What? She finally managed, barely more than a whisper. Eleanor smiled, tired but full of understanding. Do you think a mother can't tell when her son is lying? Julian has never been good at hiding things from me. When he was 5 and tried to hide a stray cat in the wardrobe, I knew the moment he was covering something up. She paused, taking a shallow, careful breath. I saw it at that first dinner. The answers that sounded memorized, the worried glances, the way Julian held your hand so stiffly, like he'd never done it before. I knew immediately something wasn't right. Tears began to slip down Chloe's cheeks. She didn't try to stop them. I'm sorry, she said, her voice breaking. We never meant to hurt you. Julian only wanted you to be happy in your last days. And I agreed because you needed money, Eleanor finished. I know about your situation, your brother, the debt. Julian isn't the only one who can investigate. Chloe stared at Eleanor, unable to believe what she was hearing. Eleanor had known everything, from the beginning to the end, and she'd still welcomed Chloe, still held her, still called her my girl. Why? Chloe asked, her voice a breath. Why didn't you say anything? Why weren't you angry? Eleanor reached out and took Chloe's hand. Her hand was cold, but it carried a strange strength. Hurt you. You gave me the greatest gift, she said, her blue eyes shining. I got to see my son smile. Truly smile. For the first time in years, Eleanor squeezed Chloe's hand tighter. You started with a lie, but I watched it turn into something real. The way Julian looks at you, that isn't acting. The way you worry about Julian, that isn't a contract. That's love, real love. Chloe cried without sound, tears streaming down her face. Eleanor continued, her voice gentle as a lullaby. I've lived long enough to know what love looks like. I saw it in the way my husband looked at me for 30 years, and I see it in the way Julian looks at you. Eyes like that can't be faked, my girl. Eleanor held Chloe's gaze, her expression serious and sincere. Do you love my son? The question was simple, but it weighed like 1,000 pounds. Chloe could have lied. She could have dodged it. She could have said she didn't know. But in front of this dying woman, who'd seen through every mask Chloe had tried to wear, Chloe couldn't offer anything but the truth. Yes, she whispered, her voice thick. I love him. I didn't plan it. I tried not to, but I couldn't stop. She paused, searching for the right words. He isn't the devil people say he is. He's just a lonely man trying to protect the people he loves. And I fell in love with him before I even realized it. Eleanor smiled, the satisfied smile of a mother who'd found the answer she needed. Then that's enough. That's all I needed to hear. She closed her eyes, her face peaceful. Now I can go in peace, knowing my son won't be alone. Chloe felt her heart tighten until it hurt. Don't say that. You'll get better. Eleanor opened her eyes and shook her head faintly. I've lived a good life, my girl. I've loved and been loved. I've watched my son grow. And now I know he has someone beside him. There's nothing left to regret. She squeezed Chloe's hand one last time. Promise me one thing, she whispered, her voice thin. Don't ever let go of my son. Julian pretends he's strong, but inside, He's more afraid of loneliness than anything in this world. He needs someone beside him. He needs you." Chloe tightened her grip around Eleanor's hand, tears still falling without end. "I promise." Chloe wiped her tears and stepped out of the hospital room. Julian and Derek were standing in the hallway, both of them watching her with worry and strain written across their faces. "She wants to see both of you," Chloe said, her voice rough. "Both of you at the same time." Julian and Derek looked at each other, the hostility between them set aside for the moment. They went into the room together, Chloe following behind. Eleanor lay there still, thin as a shadow, but her blue eyes were open, bright with a strange kind of strength. She looked at her two sons at the bedside. Julian on one side with worry carved into his face, Derek on the other with anger still burning in his gaze. "My boys," Eleanor said, her voice weak but full of love. "I know you're angry with each other, and I know why." Derek opened his mouth to speak, but Eleanor lifted a hand and stopped him. "I know everything, Derek. About the fake marriage, the contract, all of it. I've known from the beginning." Derek went pale. He looked from his mother to Julian, then to Chloe, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Mom, you knew. I'm your mother," Eleanor said with a tired smile. "I always know when you're hiding something, and I chose not to say anything because I saw something more important. I saw real love growing between them. I saw my son happy for the first time in years." She turned to Derek and held out her hand. Derek stepped forward, dropped to his knees by the bed, and took his mother's hand. "Derek, you've always wanted to protect this family. I know that, but sometimes protecting means accepting, not fighting. Trust your brother. Julian knows what he's doing." Derek bowed his head, his eyes shining red. "I'm sorry, Mom. I just didn't want you to get hurt." "You could never hurt me, my son," Eleanor said, stroking Derek's hair. "You just love me too much. That isn't a fault." Then she turned to Julian. Her eldest stood like a statue, his face blank but his gray eyes bright with tears. "Julian," she called softly, "come here to me." Julian stepped closer, sat beside the bed, and took his mother's hand. His fingers trembled. "You've found a good woman," Eleanor said, glancing toward Chloe at the foot of the bed. "Don't lose her. Don't hide behind walls anymore. Let her all the way in." Julian nodded, unable to speak. His throat seemed locked. Eleanor motioned for Chloe to come closer. Chloe stepped forward and stood beside Julian. Eleanor took Chloe's hand and placed it into Julian's, then laid her own hand over both of theirs. "Chloe, take care of my son. He pretends he's invincible, but he needs someone beside him. He needs you." She smiled, and her eyes were already beginning to blur. "And thank you for giving me these months of happiness." 3 days later, Eleanor Ashford slipped away in her sleep. When the nurse came in to check on her in the morning, she was no longer breathing, but there was still a peaceful smile on her lips, as if she were dreaming something beautiful. The funeral was held with solemn grace at Forest Lawn Cemetery. Hundreds came to pay their respects, from business partners to old friends, from casino employees to Las Vegas high society. Eleanor Ashford was more loved than Chloe had imagined. Through the entire service, Julian stood like stone. His face showed no emotion, as if he'd frozen everything inside, but his hand gripped Chloe's hand and didn't let go for a single second, and Chloe knew that behind that cold mask, Julian was breaking apart. After the service ended, when the crowd had begun to drift away, Derek walked over to Chloe. Julian was speaking with a business partner a few yards away, leaving the two of them alone. "Chloe," Derek said, and his voice was nothing like it had been before. No coldness, no threat, only exhaustion and regret. "My mother told me everything before she left. About you, about my brother, about your love." He looked down at the ground, as if he couldn't bring himself to meet her eyes. "I was wrong about you. I thought you were a con artist, thought you only wanted my brother's money. But my mother said your love for Julian is real, and she's never been wrong about that." Derek lifted his head and looked Chloe in the eye. "I'm sorry for everything I said and did. You didn't deserve to be treated that way." Chloe looked at the man standing in front of her, the man who'd threatened her, who'd crushed her wrist, who'd called her a floor-mopping girl with contempt. But she also saw a son who'd just lost his mother, a brother who'd only wanted to protect his family the only way he knew how. "I accept your apology," she said, "and I understand why you did it. You loved your mother. You loved your brother. That isn't a fault." Derek nodded, said nothing more, and walked away. When everyone had left the cemetery, Only Julian and Chloe remained by Eleanor's grave. White flowers covered the fresh mound of earth, and the headstone bore the words, Eleanor Ashford, wife, mother, eternally beloved. Julian stood in silence for a long time, staring at the stone as if he were trying to carve every letter into his memory. Then he spoke, his voice rough. The contract is over. Chloe nodded. I know. Silence settled around them. A light wind moved through, carrying the scent of flowers and fresh grass. But I don't want it to be over, Julian said, turning to her. Those gray eyes held pain, but also hope. Chloe looked at him. The man who'd entered her life through a lie and slowly become something she couldn't live without. I don't either, she said. Julian pulled her into his arms, holding her tight as if he were afraid she'd disappear. Let's start again. For real this time. Chloe nodded, pressing her face to his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. For real. The weeks after Eleanor's funeral passed in a strange kind of silence. Julian spent most of his time in the office, buried in paperwork and business, as if he were trying to drown his grief in work. Chloe stayed in the penthouse, but she felt like she was living in a suspended state, no longer sure what her place was. One morning, she gathered the few clothes she'd brought with her and began packing to leave. Julian stepped out of the bedroom, saw her folding things into a bag, and stopped. What are you doing? Chloe didn't look at him. The contract is over. I should go back to Henderson. Julian came closer, set a hand on her shoulder, and gently turned her to face him. Stay, he said, his voice rough. Not because of any contract, because I want you here. Chloe looked into his gray eyes, searching for any sign that he was speaking out of duty or pity, but she saw only sincerity. And something quietly afraid beneath it, the fear of being refused, the fear of loneliness Eleanor had named out loud. All right, she said. But we start over from the beginning. No contract, no acting, just two people trying to learn each other. Julian nodded, and for the first time in days, a faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Then let me take you on a date. Our first real date. Chloe expected him to take her to a 5-star restaurant, or some glittering club. Instead, Julian drove her to a small place in downtown Las Vegas, with old wooden tables and warm yellow lights. They served tacos and beer. No leather-bound menu, no waiters in suits. Just ordinary people eating dinner after a long day of work. Julian stood at the counter, staring at the menu board as if he were reading a contract full of fine print. He didn't know what to order. Chloe laughed under her breath. The devil of Vegas doesn't know how to order tacos. Julian glanced at her, one corner of his mouth lifting. I know how to run an empire. Tacos are harder. They ordered a mixed plate of tacos and 2 bottles of beer. Sitting across from each other in a quiet corner, they talked the way they'd never been allowed to talk before. No script, no roles, no eyes watching, just Julian and Chloe, 2 people trying to build something real. What do you want to do? Julian asked. I mean, after all of this, do you have a dream? Chloe took a bite of her taco and thought, I want to study nursing. For a long time, before my mom got sick, I wanted to be a nurse. But then everything happened, and I had to work to take care of my family. Then do it, Julian said immediately. I'll support you. Tuition, books, everything. Chloe shook her head. Not with your money. I want to earn it myself. I'll keep working and take classes at night. Julian looked at her with an expression that was part admiration, part helplessness. Stubborn, like always. That's why you like me, isn't it? Chloe said, smiling. Julian didn't deny it. In the days that followed, they learned how to live together like an ordinary couple. In the mornings, they drank coffee on the penthouse balcony, watching Las Vegas wake up. At night, they lay on the sofa and talked until late about everything and nothing at all. Chloe told him about her childhood in Henderson, about her mother, about Tommy, about the years of fighting just to survive. Julian told her about his father, about the pressure to succeed, about the sleepless nights when he'd first taken over the empire. They weren't acting anymore. It was only 2 people in love, learning how to trust and let each other in. One evening, the doorbell rang. Julian opened the door and Derek stood there, holding a bottle of red wine. Can I come in? Julian studied his brother for a moment, then stepped aside. Derek walked in and saw Chloe sitting on the sofa. He hesitated for a second, then held out the bottle. Welcome to the family. For real this time. Chloe stood and took the wine, The three of them sat together, drank, and talked. Derek told stories about Eleanor, about the times she'd scolded the two brothers for fighting when they were kids, about the apple pie she used to make every Christmas. They laughed. They remembered. They shared the weight of what they'd lost. And Chloe, for the first time in her life, felt like she belonged somewhere. Not because of money, not because of a contract, because she'd found a family. And Julian, he finally wasn't afraid of the silence in his life anymore. A year passed faster than Chloe ever thought it would. 12 months since Eleanor was gone, since the day she and Julian decided to start over. Her life had changed completely. Chloe was now a first-year nursing student at the Las Vegas Community College. Every morning she got up at 5 o'clock to review her lessons before work, and every night she studied late while Julian worked beside her. She wasn't a cleaning employee anymore. Julian had offered her a position as customer care manager at the Monarch, and after refusing again and again because she was afraid of people talking, she finally accepted when he convinced her she'd earned it on her own merit. She still lived in the penthouse with Julian, but now it wasn't a temporary place for a contract. It was her home. Tommy had changed too. Her brother had been clean for 10 months, the longest stretch since the day he first fell. He hadn't only stayed sober, he'd decided to remain at Happy Valley to work there, helping people going through what he'd gone through. Every week, Tommy called Chloe and told her about new patients, small breakthroughs, the quiet joy of being able to help someone else. "Thank you for not giving up on me," Tommy said on his most recent call. "I know I disappointed you so many times, but you stayed." Chloe had cried when she heard that. And Julian, he was still the devil of Vegas in the outside world's eyes, still cold in the boardroom, still terrifying in negotiations, still the man no one dared oppose. But when he came home, he became someone else. He laughed more, he talked more, and sometimes he even cooked for Chloe, even though the food usually came out burned or too salty. Derek visited more often now. Once, when he saw Julian washing dishes after dinner, he'd said, "You've gotten soft, Julian." Julian hadn't taken offense. He'd only shrugged and replied, "No, I've found something worth being soft for." Their relationship wasn't perfect. They still argued over little things. Over Julian working too much. Over Chloe being too stubborn to ask for help. Over the small, ordinary things every couple fights about. But they always made up before they went to sleep. That was the unspoken rule between them. Never let anger last overnight. One evening, while Julian was in the shower, Chloe tidied the living room and decided to hang up the jacket he'd left draped over a chair. As she lifted it, something slipped out of the inside pocket and fell. A small box wrapped in black velvet. Chloe's heart stopped for a beat. She bent to pick it up, her hands trembling. She knew she shouldn't open it. She knew it might be private. But she couldn't resist. The lid flipped up, and Chloe forgot how to breathe. A diamond ring rested inside, glittering under the light. Not too big, not showy, simple, but refined. Perfect. Exactly what she'd choose for herself. "You ruined the surprise." Julian's voice came from behind her. Chloe spun around, her face going hot like she'd been caught. Julian stood there, hair still damp from the shower, wearing an unbuttoned white shirt, but his eyes were smiling. Not angry, only tender. Chloe laughed, tears beginning to rise. "Were you going to propose?" Julian came closer and gently took the box from her hands. "I'm still going to propose. Come with me." Julian took Chloe's hand, guided her into the elevator, and pressed the button for the very top floor. Chloe knew immediately where they were going. The rooftop, the place they'd stood together for the first time, where Las Vegas had glittered like a sea of stars beneath their feet, where they'd almost kissed before she stepped back and said, "We shouldn't." The elevator doors opened and cool night wind rushed in. Chloe stepped out, and it felt as if time folded backward to that night. The city still shimmered. The sky was still black as velvet. Neon lights still blinked in endless colors. But something was different. She was different. Julian was different. They'd traveled a long road to return to this place. Julian led her to the exact spot where they'd stood that year, then stopped. He turned to face her, gray eyes deep under the glow of the city. Then he dropped to one knee. Chloe lifted a hand to cover her mouth, tears already rising before he'd even said a word. "The first time I said you were my wife." "It was a lie," Julian began, his voice low and trembling slightly. "The first time I held your hand, it was acting. I didn't know who you were, didn't know what you'd lived through. I only knew I needed someone to play a part in my own private theater." He paused and swallowed hard, but somewhere along the way, it became real. I don't know exactly when. Maybe it was the night you told me about your mother. Maybe it was when you refused my money, even though you needed it more than you'd ever admit. Maybe it was when you saw me break for my mother and you didn't run. You looked straight through my darkness. You stayed when you had every reason to walk away. Julian opened the ring box, the diamond catching the Las Vegas lights and throwing them back like a star. So now I'm asking you, for real this time, Chloe Bennett, will you be my wife? Tears streamed down Chloe's cheeks, but she was smiling. Smiling with joy, with disbelief, with the strange certainty that life could still be miraculous. The first time I met you, I was holding a mop, she said, her voice thick. You were the devil everyone in Las Vegas feared. I was just a cleaning girl people pointed at and called worthless. I never imagined this. Julian smiled, that rare smile only she ever got to see. I didn't either. That's what makes it perfect. He rose, still holding the ring in his hand. She's my wife, he said, repeating exactly what he'd said in the casino lobby more than a year ago. That's what I told them. This time, when I say it, it'll be true. Chloe nodded, tears still falling. Yes, this time it's real. Julian took her hand and slid the ring onto her left ring finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made only for her. Then he pulled her into his arms, and they kissed beneath the Las Vegas night sky. Not a kiss for a contract, not a kiss for a script. A kiss between two people who'd found each other in the middle of impossible circumstances and decided they would never let go. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with a lie. Sometimes the devil isn't who the world insists he is. And sometimes a girl with a mop ends up beside an entire empire. Not for money, but because she saw the human being behind the monster's mask. Chloe Bennett became Chloe Ashford not through a contract, but through a choice. And Julian Ashford, he finally found what he'd been searching for his whole life. Not power, not control, just someone to come home to. This story teaches us that we should never judge a person by appearances or circumstances. Behind everyone are stories, wounds, and longings we can't see. Real love doesn't come from perfection. It comes from accepting and loving each other through every flaw. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button and share it with the people who still believe in second chances. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss more moving stories every day. How did this story make you feel? Did it remind you of anything in real life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd truly love to hear what's on your heart. Thank you for staying with us to the very end. Wishing everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in every day. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.